Dear friends, in this lecture we are going to talk about the research paradigm that has emerged in the context of feminist inquiry. We are familiar with research process. All of us are engaged in conducting research, and we have a model where we begin with some hypothesis, we find certain variables, and we develop tools, we collect data, we analyze that data with the help of statistical techniques, and then we test the hypothesis and we draw certain conclusions. This is a kind of framework which has been established in almost all disciplines, and the desire is to achieve the status of physical sciences. Most of the social sciences are trying to emulate the kind of precision, the pattern of prediction, and ability to control the variables under study as we find in physical sciences. In fact, in psychology, there is a term, physics envy, that we would like to behave like physicists, and we aspire to get that kind of precision. Let me mention the ideal of social scientific inquiry is rooted in a model of positivist science where we assume an external reality, and that reality is independent of the observer. And the observer has to be a neutral observer, free from any values, free from subjectivity, and the mode of understanding is primarily rooted in observation. And with the help of observation, we collect data, and then we use that data almost like a physical object. We measure that. We have econometry, we have psychometry, we have sociometry. You can see the emphasis on measurement, on quantification. And the journey starts with that, and then we forget about subjectivity, we forget about the person, and we consider the individual who participates in our studies as an object. And then we draw certain conclusions about various variables and processes. We are happy with that. This model of doing social science is prevalent, accepted in almost all disciplines. The feminist interest, which started with various movements, started with the participation of activists, some intellectuals, and that questioned the degree to which the whole inquiry is partial or not partial in relation to gender issues. And it was realized that there is something wrong with the whole notion of science, and the positivist science was criticized. We don't have time to go into the details of that critique, but I would like to mention that a lot of discussion is available in philosophy of science, which questions the relevance and significance of doing positivist model of social inquiry. And that has led to revising the whole scheme of doing research and trying to understand that. And in that context, the term paradigm has become very significant. Paradigm, which became quite famous with Kuhan's work on the study of scientific revolutions, tries to communicate that science is not a purely objective exercise. What is considered as fact, knowledge gained through that observation, which is the backbone of science, is rooted in some kind of theory, some kind of perspective. It is relative to that. And it's a human activity. And it is also subject to various kinds of errors which we find in human behavior. It's not as rational as has been supposed. A variety of criticisms were presented. An important criticism was posed by Richard Rorty, a philosopher who mentioned that our mind is not the mirror of reality. It's not that the entire process is of mirroring and you have a perfect mirror where reality is represented adequately. No. The essence of the whole debate is that social sciences are involved in reality construction. Reality is constructed, and this construction process has many consequences. And one of them is that subjectivity cannot be denied and subjectivity should be respected. Not only that, the role of observer is very important in construction of this reality. The perspective of the researcher is very important. Similarly, it was observed that perhaps the nature of reality which is being obtained in research is not of just one kind. There is possibility of multiple realities, multiple truths. If you look at the hermeneutics, it tells that what you do is interpretation. And you move from one interpretation to the other interpretation, from that to another interpretation, and you are moving in an interpretive circle of interpretations, hermeneutic circle. So the faith that you had in objective reality, control, prediction is problematic. It is not like that. I'm referring to a series of debates which have led to important changes in research methods. I did mention about the term paradigm, which refers to the word view. Uh, I would like to mention that the paradigm tells about what is the nature of reality, that is ontology, and what can be known about that, epistemology, and how that can be known, that is methodology, and also what are the values involved in that, axiology. So a given paradigm has all these elements. The move from positivist paradigm of research, which also led to other steps. There is a post-positivism, you have post-structuralism, and you have a number of such paradigms. And gradually the move that has taken place is in the direction of relativizing everything. So feminist paradigm, as I understand, is a kind of participatory, action-oriented, constructionist paradigm. Participatory, action-oriented, and constructionist paradigm. These are the key aspects of this paradigm. Now, if you try to look at this, you will notice that the assertion of independent objective reality is denied. Ontologically, the feminist inquiry favors a perspective on reality which considers that reality is historically constructed. And this kind of reality is shaped by the economic, historical, social, cultural factors and processes. So the nature of reality which can be discovered is not something which is eternal. वह शाश्वत नहीं है कि हमेशा के लिए एक ही प्रकार की reality रहेगी. No. So the ontology, it is not a realism. It is not the realism that we find in positivist inquiry. It talks about reality which is a kind of virtual reality which is shaped by a number of factors. As far as epistemology is concerned, the dualism which was present in case of positivist view, that there is an objective reality which can be understood, the feminist inquiry considers a transactional perspective, and it is a perspective which says that our inquiry is value mediated. The inquiry focuses on subjectivity. It tries to uncover and understand the subjectivity. What about methodology? The positivist approach favors experimentation, where the goal is to explain, to predict, and to control. The feminist inquiry takes the assignment in a different way. It is dialogical, and it tries to look at the reflexivity that the researcher goes, understands, reflects, relates, and the participant also is participating as a co-constructor of reality. There is difference in the whole perspective. In particular, when we talk about methodology, as a student of psychology, we used to call the participant in research or experiment, particularly subject. And when we write reports, the characteristics of subjects are removed. So subject is a neutral object. Subject is required only to collect data about emotion, motivation, perception, or any other psychological attribute or process. Otherwise, it's not required because that will create bias. So, you know, you make the person free from all the characteristics which make them human. The feminist inquiry is more sensitive to that. I would like to mention that there is a power relationship between the researcher and the subject who is being studied, or the person who is being interrogated, investigated. You as a researcher at a high pedestal and that person knows less, person who is being studied. So this kind of power relationship is there. But in feminist inquiry, they are at the same level. Both are human beings and they co-construct reality. So the context is also important, and the power relationship which is there but which has been denied is being recognized. And you do something to remove that power differential and make the approach more and more sensitive. So the feminist inquiry differs from the accepted model of positivist social science research, which has one notion of ontology, epistemology, and methodology. It moves towards subjectivity, towards the role of, realizing the role of the context in which behavior takes place. Life operates, different relationships assume their existence in certain context, and that has to be recognized in the process of study. Now, there is a term which is frequently used that in positivist approach, there is hegemony of one kind of perspective. एक विशेष दृष्टिकोण का वर्चस्व बना हुआ. But in positivist inquiry, using one perspective, we lose sight of the various possible ways to look at reality. The feminist inquiry has a goal in terms of deciphering the reality and making things which were invisible, particularly in the case of women, to make them visible and to see what is the contribution of that, what is peculiar to that. And I understand that an important goal of feminist inquiry is to do something to empower the deprived, marginalized, disadvantaged person. So it is not value neutral. It has a value, and the value is to retain, to restore the dignity of being a human. So it's a, a value loaded inquiry, and I don't think it's wrong. You can't say that you are not responsible for this. So the sensibility which is present in feminist researchers is to recognize subjectivity, to recognize the role of the contextual factors, to understand the implications of values, and to have this perspective that we need to create a context in which the person's dignity is restored. Now, it is also important to note that when you do positivist research, you do frame certain hypotheses, and knowledge is in the nature of confirmed hypotheses. But here, in the feminist inquiry, it is the insight that you get about the dynamics of relationships as located, positioned, situated in a given context. Similarly, I think it is also important to note that the positivist researcher is often treated as a disinterested scientist. That is the ideal. But here, almost all feminist researchers consider themselves as transformative in their orientation. They are intellectuals who are engaged in the process of research as participant, active participant. They are interested to change the condition. So the goal of empowerment is there. In this sense, the framework, the orientation, and the practices of feminist inquiry become different from the traditional positivist inquiry. And they question the hegemony. It is more humanistic, and the kind of knowledge which is produced in this process is one which is contextual, related to situation, which is quite varied, and the cultural context becomes very crucial in this kind of inquiry. Now, this scenario is a very general commentary on the changing perspective on feminist inquiry. The movement, in paradigmatic terms, is in favor of situated learning, understanding of processes which have led to oppression, which have led to a kind of authoritarian perspective, and which have been trying to reproduce oppression in society. Now what is the goal? The goal is critical. The goal is to promote egalitarian relationships, and must say that it's a kind of political form of knowledge production which takes place. And there are many terms which have been introduced. Liberation or emancipation become crucial concerns in these processes. And we try to understand reality in this scenario, in this context. If you look at the methods which are used, they are very close to so-called qualitative methods. So you have ethnography, you have focused group discussion, you have long interviews, you have narrative reality construction, and then you go for thematic analysis, you go for grounded theoretical analysis of stories, texts, interviews. So almost all the methods which are used in these studies which are undertaken by feminist researchers, they would like to use different methods which are qualitative in nature. And most importantly, they are interdisciplinary in nature. The word which has been quite frequently used these days is intersectionality. That, it is at the intersection of many things. It's not one. You can't complete your study being only as a psychologist. You need to take input from sociology and economics and history and political science. So it becomes an interdisciplinary endeavor of study and research. We would like to focus on some of the perspectives, some of the studies, some of the trends which have emerged in the context of this changing scenario of feminist inquiry.